This is Entrepreneur Authorities. Whether you're building your brand, scaling your startup, or just getting started, get ready to be inspired, empowered, and equipped to take your next big leap. Well, I'm Joe Pardavila, and I'm joined today again by Charles Sims. Charles was a CTO who's worked with the likes of the LA Clippers and UTA, and now he's helping startups figure out what really drives success. Charles built something he calls the Hurricane methodology, a system that came out of high-pressure moments where failure wasn't an option. What started as a way to keep live events running smoothly turned into a framework for spotting which startups will actually deliver on what they promise. Charles Sims, welcome back to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me here.
You're very welcome. And so last time we chatted, it was the Charles Sims Marvel origin story about how you became Hurricane CTO. But this time we're really digging into the Hurricane methodology that we alluded to. So you developed this in some of the high pressure environments imaginable. We talked about it, your work with the Clippers, UTA. What sparked the need for it in the first place? The methodology, because as we said, your wife joked that you were the Hurricane CTO, but why the methodology?
Well, let's be clear. My wife didn't joke that I was the Hurricane CTO. I was just the Hurricane.
Right.
Um,
You tied it in.
yes, but I tied it in. No, the nickname kind of came from when I first started the Clippers. There was very little infrastructure. There's very little processes. There's very little understanding of like what is what. The previous head of IT actually just left on a Thursday when they were moving to the new offices on the following Monday, and no documentation, no idea of what's what. To one of my favorite experiences actually was me and my best friend at the time we worked together actually had to roll this server rack across Figueroa Street, which is right outside of Staples Center, to the new offices 2 blocks away, in the middle of the night while everything was down over that weekend after we were engaged. And so it felt like that first year or two, it was so much of you're just getting through the hurricane. You're trying to fix more than that's being broken. And I started to adopt this idea or methodology of we can break things because we can fix them faster. We can think through things more strategically rather than always being analysis paralysis. And it's going to be better because it was terrible. It's always going to be better. So you start getting some of those wins at your sale, and it makes it so much easier. But the backside of it is everywhere I'd go, I'm having to rip cords out. I'm having to shut down servers because we have no idea what it is. And so you're shutting down a server, waiting. Did somebody scream? All right, no one screamed. That server wasn't being used at that time. And so there was a lot of that type of chaos that I became to embrace more and more in it. And then where it solidified itself was we had this massive outage. We had a water leak right above our server room at this building, and immediately jumped into it. Started giving directions of the salespeople coming in. We're using old Blake Griffin jerseys to mop up the water. We're protecting the servers, but we get to the point where everything is still up. The water has been shut down, and now I move on to the next thing. I move on to the next fire, move on to whatever it is. And that's when my IT manager at the time said, "You're just like a hurricane, man." I said, "Yeah, I'm the hurricane that comes and fixes all of it. And then once we're good to go, I got something else I got to be moving to. Now you guys have to come in and make it all nice and tidy again."
So that was sort of like the impetus for this methodology. When did you realize that it went beyond tech ops and could work into what you're doing now and help evaluating startups?
So it's definitely an interesting realization that is almost like retcon. It's almost like looking back, I realized this is a way that I approach a lot of things in my life because I don't have a traditional technical background. I went to school for product management or project management and entrepreneurship. I didn't have any CS degree. I was never a coder growing up. I was very much going to be that what I had hoped was the serial entrepreneur. But the way that I went about problem solving, as soon as I did get deeper and deeper and deeper into the technical world, that's when I found, oh, the way that I solve things in anywhere else applies here. The way that I solve, how do we get this project greenlit? How do we think through this business? made sense in a very dry domain. So usually IT, it's a lot of folks that don't necessarily know what's breaking, what's wrong, and they'll give an excuse of, oh, well, we should have done this, and then it's always in the past sense of, well, we'll make sure that it doesn't happen next time, and then it happens next time, and then it happens next time. And so bringing it around back to why the Hurricane CTO became that moniker was everything that I was doing in regular business related back to technical, and then that really deep technical experience that I gained over those 15 years or so. As I came back to VC and started helping out business owners, it was those same conversations now, just with a really unique lens on, we can use these tools, we can use these things to rapidly scaffold up your business, rapidly transform how you're going about things, and not just selling tech, but actually selling transformation within the organization.
And, I use this phrase, the entrepreneur's conundrum: find a problem, fix a problem. And sometimes that problem is a gap.
Mm-hmm.
And you often talk about the gaps between capability and execution. What did experiences teach you about real world performance when it came to filling the gaps of capability and execution?
I really appreciate the experiences I had at the Clippers, specifically on the basketball side, because it was all about execution there. And hearing day in and day out, whether it's talking to players, whether it's talking to the front office or talking to coaches, their mindset of, there's not a good loss. There is always driving for that win, always driving for uh, that that perfection. And although during my time they weren't unfortunately ever able to make it, it changed my concept as I brought it back to the business side, and I brought it back to the technical side of, you need to have that winning mentality, not because you have to be a perfection, or you have to make sure that everything is um, uh, exactly your way and micromanage it all the way down. It's more so, you have to lead the team to believe that we are going to win, to not just get downtrodden, not get so overwhelmed with everything that they can't find that way out, that North Star.
And so now that you've merged the two worlds of the tech side and the business side, from the investor side,
Mhm.
what are investors still missing when they focus only on tech stacks, markets, and financials? What gaps are there? What are they missing out on?
It's There's so much value, and one of the products that we had developed when I first came into this space was focused on, how do you value the intangibles, the things that aren't easy to put in paper. And so for a typical M&A deal, you go through tech due diligence that creates a deal model offset. So you're saying they are behind our best practices by, I don't know, $2 million. So then that goes into the deal model to say, all right, it's going to be less, $2 million less. But there was never that concept of, how do you value the employees, how do you value the processes, how do you value all of these things that are more intangible in nature outside of sales is very easy to value. How good is the sales team? Well, they are what they eat, and that's how much they add to the top line. But the entrepreneur and VC side of the world, when you're talking to an investor, trying to help them understand the unique values that they might overlook. And so there's a lot of the metrics, and how we value companies traditionally is an easy way to have a starting point. But I think it's anywhere from 40 to maybe 50% of the picture, where in reality, the strength of the management team, the strength of the actual understanding what their niche and their problem and their passion to solve that problem is, the nice combination between a really solid executioner as well as a technical visionary, that is worth so much more. Even if their new startup's going to be batteries, they will still be more successful that somebody has the most whiz bang cool next thing, but they can't execute, or they can't have the cohesiveness to drive that startup forward.
And this last time I'm going to use this word gap here, but you often talk about human execution gap.
Hmm.
What does that look like in practice? I mean, I guess in theory I could kind of surmise what it means, but what do you mean by human execution gap?
So everybody loves to promise and budget time. We're going to do all these amazing things. Just give us the budget. We're going to be so innovative. We're going to be like this is going to change the entire organization. And innovation means nothing without execution. It's just marketing speak at that point, and that relates to everything. Whether it's a ERP migration, whether it's a an M&A transaction that you're trying to push through, before you actually get that past the finish line, you can't celebrate, you can't get any value from it for the organization. So it's all about focus on execution and in a agile, adaptable way. Just like every new startup, whatever their first idea is might be the kernel, but it has to shift so much by the time that they actually get to Series A, to Series B, to Series D, that agility is required. And in the same thing in corporate America, of you are going in to execute value for the company. Even if your project shifts, it shouldn't be shifting with shiny ball syndrome and this one and that one. Well, this is going to, Salesforce is going to change our world, and then AI over here is going to change our world, but they're not actually thinking through the transactional value, that synthetic balance sheet concept that we have for any sort of decision like that.
All right, so let's tie this methodology into startups. Walk me through this. How does the framework work in terms of how, using binary troubleshooting questions? How does that expose how founders think under pressure?
So binary troubleshooting is something that I love doing with very strong opinionated folks. And in engineering and technical, there are a ton of those when you meet them. They're very sure of being right. And that binary troubleshooting in that instance is you're trying to get a absolutely opposite opinion out of them from what they're saying now without them flip-flopping. So if you're pushing them on an idea that they're very, very passionate about, try to go so far, not just a little bit of it. Don't just pivot with me a little bit. No, so far across the table, something that is absolutely against it. Help me figure out how that relates or what value that adds to the conversation, and then come back. And then you keep cutting off that 50%, 50%, 50% until you get to the middle of what the Goldilocks perfect idea, what the perfect product, what the perfect niche, what the perfect execution looks like. And it really opens up their eyes to try to not make big swings, but when they ideate, make big ideation swings.
And you're the non-tech guy, tech guy. And as a tech guy, you love systems. You guys love your systems. So let's talk about modular systems. What does modular systems thinking tell you about a founder's clarity or maybe even confusion?
In something I said just a second ago, founders have their ugly baby. They have their pride that is their startup, and trying to get them to think productizing everything that is within their space requires that systems thinking, and a modular some systems thinking where you're not building technology or stacks into the platform that are baked as a brand. They're baked as a functionality. I'm not putting Salesforce in, I'm putting CRM, and I'm not putting NetSuite in, I'm putting in ERP. And even within those platforms, there's so much overlap that making the decision on what the strategic integration is, what the right way to use this for your sales processes, while this is for your books and GP and et cetera. And then now as you get into the custom development world and building up a true startup app or SaaS-based app, have the same idea. It's not just AWS. It's not just Cloudflare or GCP or Azure or whatever those pieces are. Start thinking those as the agnostic terms, and then that modular way to put those pieces together. You're never going to put yourself into a corner. You are spending an enormous amount on this one thing that you can't get off of because it is so baked and backed into that technical debt from that one vendor, from that one implementation.
On that subject, and I know I want to focus this on founders, our conversation, but like I see a lot of founders and even like entrepreneur companies, business companies, when they have these systems in place, there's so much overlap. Like literally, like you'll have a project management software that you can send messages on, but then you also have Slack where you send messages on, and then you have Zoom, which you can send message. Like there's so much overlap in tech stacks. On the tech side of things, how can we clean that up so people know And what advice you give to people when it comes to like the best way to communicate? Because I know in some of the places I've been at, I'm like, wait a minute, now I have 8 different places I've got messages from.
Mhm.
On top of that, we got the good old texts and emails, but then we also have the CRM that's going to get messages, your project managers, but Salesforce is going to, it's like so much messaging
Yeah.
going on here. What advice do you give to people in that world?
So what you're explaining is what we call sprawl, and it's not just the founders and owners' fault as much as it is the tech giants. It blew my mind when Zoom came out with email. Why is Zoom coming out with email? They are the video conferencing platform, and Microsoft is known for doing this of trying to have so many different pieces in the ecosystem that you start to not really know, am I supposed to be messaging somebody on Outlook or Teams or Yammer or whatever it may be. But it's important that as the founder, as the leader, to really try to simplify and then communicate the vision and communicate the reasoning to it. Folks are going to always fall back to what's easiest and what's normal. So don't make decisions with a long stick and say you have to do this. This is what it is. But if you can communicate why it's important for us, guys, when we're doing informal communication, that's on Slack. If we're doing anything in communicating with clients, we need to make sure if it's a potential lead or anything like that, we are emailing with the integration into HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever the CRM, because that's our sales platform. If we're doing service, now that's going to be Zendesk, even though they're in trouble right now. But you name it, and trying to go back to stop calling it whatever brand name it is or product name it is. Call it the agnostic. Our CRM, our sales platform, our omnichannel marketing. Those are really, really important for the founders to understand. And there's a great periodic table that we like to show people when we're standing up a startup in 90 days. We give them a standard stack of here's everything that will get you going. And with the functionality turned on and the functionality you don't need, it's turned off. You don't have to tinker, you don't have to mess with anything. And it's all fairly off the shelf. And you don't need to be complex at the beginning. You just need a single source and understanding of what different pieces are going to be doing.
No, it's good. Well, thank you for indulging me because it does drive me crazy. And I think and I think we all know why tech companies are so rich because every every company known to man has 8 different of these things in there, and no one knows how to communicate. So that's a great message for founders and leaders out there. So speaking of these founders, one of the things that you pay close attention to is the build, buy, configure decisions. First of all, break those down and why you pay close attention to those 3 pillars.
So the build, usually you're going to hear build or buy. Should we build this X, Y, and Z widget custom, or should we buy X, Y, and Z off the shelf solution? And usually the breakdown between the two is the build's going to take a lot longer. It's going to be more expensive, and you have to keep it up. The buy is going to not be perfect. It's going to have a lot of overlapping functionality. It's locking you into a much longer contract, and it over time tends to get more and more expensive and not as valuable as what it would be if you could custom curate it. My recommendation 95% of the time is buy and focus on configuration over customization. So don't set up your Salesforce and start putting a bunch of custom modules in it. Just utilize a regular sales flow and drip campaigns and how you communicate, because that is best practice. In a very similar way, when we're talking with design teams, we're talking with product teams, don't go into Figma and build a completely brand new UI library to make this app the most sexy app that it could ever be. Focus on getting material UI. Google uses it, Facebook uses it, or the various open source that are so well used. Get your functionality up, then start to customize on top of that. So don't start design first development, start development first design.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. So after all this we've talked about, how does SkaFld Studios play a part in this, using this methodology, working with founders, working with startups? How's it all work?
So I initially had the Hurricane methodology that was originally much more focused on your corporate. So talking to the other CTOs, CIOs, or CEOs, how to communicate across that barrier. As I've shifted and we have SkaFld Studio really churning, it's taking a manifesto that I took that Hurricane CTO and created this level of a number of different frameworks that we use when we're helping scaffold up organizations and scaffold up startups. 80% of the hard work to get a business, to get a startup going, is not the actual development. It's the getting incorporated. Which corporation? What legal should we have? What initial system should we be putting together? What's our hiring process? Like all of those pieces that are not that special and not that hard to do. We take that into account of, all right, let's rapidly bring them up to speed. And now when we're ideating with them, we have our ideation framework that takes any domain, or whether it's government, academia, very early stage startups, AI, corporate innovation, and tries to break down their thought process and how they're thinking through problems, very similar to how your initial business plan for a startup would be. What is the problem? What is the solution? What's the target market? What's the personas, et cetera, et cetera? But it just now translated to those other various domains. And as we walk through that process with them, we keep going down this framework, and we hold tight to it because it works very well with AI-led development. Now we're using the same blueprint. It's nothing special, but it's keeping us all on the same line to understand at each step of the way what is adding value or what is taking away or adding liability to the future opportunity for this startup, for this founder, for this product, whatever it may be. Is using that framework consistently with our clients, with our portfolio companies and our investments, so that we're as transparent as possible. This is why we think the way we think.
That's great. And it's funny. There's this adage in like content creation or book publishing of like, if your thing is for everyone, it's for no one. And you use scaffolding. Scaffold sounds like it's very industry agnostic. So how does that work? Everyone can use it, but it still works for everybody.
So it's interesting, and this is where some of the special sauce has really drove into it. A lot of the input from our partners in one of our partners who comes from government and academia. As soon as I started talking to them of how I saw startups, he goes, "Oh, we could use the same thing of how do we figure out which grants we should fund, or how do we empower the local residents to put the proper proposal together so that it's translated to our language." And so this framework, all it is at its core is a translation framework between different types of personalities. So technical to non-technical, an investor to an entrepreneur, and taking away that burden that you have to learn and code switch to the other language, because it helps lay those pieces out. And so now it's not something that just works for everything because it's so special and works for everything. No, we're decomposing things down to their relatable pieces, so that communication is much easier to have.
That's cool. That's awesome. And obviously, since you're a tech company, you can't spell scaffolding like a regular human being. It has to be spelled SkaFld. And I say this in jest, obviously, but it almost sounds like you're literally your name. Like you are providing the scaffolding for a company, again, agnostic to the industry, that whatever you're doing, this is the scaffold that will to prop up the company. I'm not a genius here, right, Charles?
No, you're right. You're right on the money. That's where it came from. Of we can scaffold. After I had a number of these very, very successful startups that went from zero to almost raising their Series B in less than a year. That hard part was very easy to me. That hard part of the business side of things, the back end side of things, like all of that, you can have done in a weekend or two. And now being focused on just the front end and using a framework to help you think of that front, like the application itself, the industry, and breaking down the knowledge barrier there. Again, we got your scaffolding, we got your blueprint, we get you going with that way that makes it comfortable to you and empowers you as an entrepreneur, rather than talking down to you, rather than telling you, oh, you have no idea what you're doing. Okay, well, I don't live in SF, or I don't live in California. I don't have investor friends. I don't know how to even pitch this. Let's break those barriers.
That's awesome. That's so good. Would you mind sharing a story of how SkaFld Studios and your methodology kind of changed the trajectory of a company? You may not be able to name names, but maybe throw in like a mysterious, pseudonym. But just because I'd love to see, especially someone watching or listening to this, like in real world application, how does this look?
So we had an organization that is very successful in a niche space within social media, but they got very lucky because of their founder and how good of relationships that founder had within that space. And so they were just fed contracts and fed contracts. And after a couple conversations, when they were just asking me my advice, the biggest thing I was saying, you guys got to productize. You got to productize yourself. You got to productize your services. You got to standardize and scale without just scaling with people, scaling with standardized processes. So I want to say just giving them advice for maybe 6, 7, 8 months before we even actually officially engaged with them was how that came to be. And at the time that we initially engaged, it was a little rough, but within 30 days, we're getting them into AI development processes. We are standardizing how do they go through their customer service stack and get the basics of getting tickets properly coming in and being responded to. The functionality isn't just going into a black hole because there's communication gaps between the back and the front. And we're doing that initial 30 days without talking to anybody. We're utilizing what I like to say is, anytime that you're going into a situation, you're trying to figure out what's going on, don't talk to people first, because one, people lie to you, but they don't mean to. So they will say, oh, here's our entire process, and here's why it's broken. Here's this, that, the other, but they don't have the full context. They don't know what the CFO knows. They don't know what the head of engineering or these other folks that have a lot more of their own specific domain context, but also they don't have the context of everybody else. And so with that framework, it's like, how do we decompose this entire organization into its smaller pieces of how do they communicate? How do they interact? How do they ideate? How do they move things forward? How do they manage and lead? How do they communicate? How do they get themselves out into the market? And so for this specific organization, within 90 days, we had them not only humming along and pushing product 10 times faster than they were for the last 2.5 years, that they were killing it. They had all the revenue in the world. It just, they were pulling their hair out. And now all of a sudden they were able to quickly scale, because they weren't scaling by people. They were scaling by the products and the services and the processes that they built. So that's an example where that framework comes in. Decompose everything, give them a blueprint, and move them on.
That's good stuff. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. It comes from, I've kind of reminded of the fact of, I always love when a company brings in a new system, they talk about how bad the old system was. You talk about the fact, like when you ask someone what they think about something, and it's always comical to me that when they bring a new system, the person who brings a new system is inevitably the person who brought in the old system.
Oh yeah.
But talk about it like an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, like, man, they are just so terrible. I'm so glad that they're gone. We have this new one, like, well, wait a minute. Weren't you the and no one ever brings that up. They choose to not take any responsibility for picking that previous system, but talk about how good this new system is. And I know it's human nature, like, to protect your own butt, but it is comical to me when you hear people talk about, we got the new system that's better than the old system, but like, wait a minute, you were the one who picked the old system, so how do we know this one is going to work?
So I love that story because I experienced it so much, especially in my technology side in the corporate world, and when I did consulting, where I would come in, and historically the consultant's going to say, "Oh, everything here is terrible. They have no idea what they're doing. The last person ruined absolutely everything," and I took it from a different lens, and was really successful with, there's probably a reason. So there's a reason why they weren't able to get this project in. There's probably a reason why you guys have so much tech debt. I could venture a guess. You didn't approve any of the budget that was being asked for the last 2 or 3 years. but they also didn't present that budget in a business fashion. They presented it in a typical, oh, the sky is falling. If we don't have this, that, and the other, our entire organization is going to fail. And it's like, you only get one of those before the board no longer listens to you. It says you're not actually what's going on. But as these systems come in, it's always the next thing has its own honeymoon period. You get excited. The previous employees hate it because it makes their life harder. To be successful, you need more and more champions. So you need that internal salesmanship. You need that ability to bring it in, and you have to actually care about what's going to be helpful to them versus I just got to get it in. I just got to jam it in and finish this project.
Yeah, no, to me, it's so funny because there's almost like some cognitive dissonance of like when they introduce the product, they talk about how amazing it is, yet forget the year or two later after they got like, man, this is terrible. So it's almost like they've disconnected themselves from
Yeah.
it, and I find so much humor in it because they don't, maybe they don't want to see it. That it's one of those things where like, yeah, all right, that didn't work. Let's move on to the next thing. So I'm not going to acknowledge what a bad choice that was. So I'm moving on. And so a lot of this, we talk about technical excellence, and you've often said that it's become the enemy of startup success. From anyone who reads your stuff, watches your conversations, watches this, you are pragmatic almost to a fault, right? You are a very pragmatic young man. Why is that? Why is pragmatism so important when it comes to not being so set on technical excellence and being completely perfect?
Because to me, everything has to have value. So just having the most complicated, you give a networking engineer 6 months to put up a network within a building, they're going to have the most complicated Cisco, all this saying that there's so much redundancy and this, that, and the other. They spent $4 million on something that doesn't really fit the needs of what the organization needed. And when it breaks, no one knows how to fix it. So like the focus on simplicity to me adds so much more value to, even if it won't stand up to the 5 nines, as everybody says, which means 99.99%, 90.9999% availability. That's fine as long as I know how to fix it. And maybe it's rebooting this, or maybe it's flipping over to that. Like that's where you want to be agile and always be building agile into it. And agile doesn't mean expensive. Agile doesn't mean just double the cost. Agile means plan A, plan B, plan C. And sometimes plan C is, hey, man, we're going to send the interns over. We're going to manually do this thing.
That's good. That's awesome. All right. So I would lose my business podcast license if I don't ask an AI question here, Charles.
Oh.
So let's wrap it up talking about AI. As AI reshapes technology, how do you see the Hurricane methodology evolving? And why do you think human skills will matter even more? We've obviously talked about the fact that like there's a very human side of your methodology and the way SkaFld works. But tell me how it all is going to interplay with artificial intelligence.
So, what artificial intelligence is amazing at is a couple things. One of them is going to be helping bridge communication gaps. So, like I was saying before, it is one of the best tools to have a CEO and a CMO who are preparing for their one-on-one to try to figure out how to empathetically understand where the other one might be talking about, or how to talk to them in their language, or between the product team and the engineering team, how do you bridge that barrier? And so, well, that in of itself, of being able to not be an expert in everything, just be somebody who is an expert in humans, showing empathy, curiosity. Now AI allows you to really do some amazing things where you are aligned so much closer to your fellow people in your organization. At the same time, it's a way that is reducing the barriers to entry for so many things. It is some of our most brilliant developers are kids, or not kids, but like 18, 20, 21 year olds who learned everything on YouTube. They learned this not at college, not at grad school, but truly just turning on YouTube and watching one of these creators show them how to build out a chat bot, show them how to do AI data processing or anything like that. And so that's where AI is amazing. It breaks down barriers. It breaks down the communication and the barrier to entry. It's going to help you have a ideator that doesn't make you feel like you're going to lose face or social face. You're embarrassed to ask a question. You can actually, yes, it's going to not be perfect. It's going to hallucinate. So don't take everything for fact, but it's going to be a very, very qualified, just person to go back and forth at. So if you're trying to ideate through something, and this is what we do a lot with our jam sessions, where we're just batting around ideas and we're saying yes and oh, that's interesting. How do we keep ideating through that? Well, there's a lot that you can use, just chatting with ChatGPT, chatting with Claude, chatting with any of those to solve. My mom and pop carpet shop has lost revenue consistently over the last 10 months. What are some strategies that I can look at to implement, even if they're not technical? Okay, maybe it's they give you a nice framework for advertising. Going back to the frameworks, AI is also really good at following a framework you give it. And so keeping that in mind and keeping that consistency is amazing as a small business owner who doesn't have access to analysts, who doesn't have access to a lot of these things. But with the grain of salt of, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to, you can't just say, go make me $1 million, but you can use it as a tool in your tool belt.
Awesome. That's awesome. All right. So Charles, if folks want to connect, find out more about SkaFld Studios, where should they start?
You're always welcome to email me directly, charles@SkaFldStudio.com, or find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, MySpace, Instagram, and just SkaFldStudio.com. We'd love to chat.
Great, Charles. He's the Hurricane CTO. Charles, thanks for the chat. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
And that will do it for this episode. If you're an entrepreneur ready to grow your industry recognition as an author and entrepreneur.com contributor, go to authorities.entrepreneur.com.